Hello, good evening, and welcome to a new episode of Arguably the Reading Quest. So the book I'm going to talk about today is Middlemarch by George Eliot. But before we start, let's read and ponder upon some quotes. Some really beautiful, incisive quotes. If we had a keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heart beat, and we should die of that roar which lies on the other side of silence. Is this not a true autumn day? Just this still melancholy that I love, that makes life and nature harmonize. The birds are consulting about their migrations. The trees are putting on the hectic or the pallid hues of decay, and begin to strew the ground, that one's very footsteps may not disturb the repose of earth and air. When they give us a scent that is a perfect anodyne to the restless spirit, delicious autumn, my very soul is wedded to it, and if I were a bird, I would fly about the earth seeking successive autumns. To be a poet is to have a soul so quick to discern that no shade of quality escapes it, and so quick to feel that discernment is but a hand playing with finely ordered variety on the chords of emotions. A soul in which knowledge passes instantaneously into feeling, and feeling flashes back into a new organ of knowledge. Now see, this is immensely beautiful. If youth is the season of hope, it is often so only in the sense that our elders are hopeful about us. For no age is so apt as youth to think of its emotions, partings, and resolves are the last of their kind. Each crisis seems final, simply because it is new. We are told that the oldest inhabitants in Peru do not cease to be agitated by the earthquakes, but they probably see beyond each shock and reflect that there are plenty more to come. He once called her his basil plant, and when she asked for an explanation, said that basil was a plant which has flourished wonderfully on a murdered man's brains. This is iconic and unparalleled quote. Self-consciousness of manner is the expensive substitute for simplicity. To know intense joy without a strong bodily frame, one must have an enthusiastic soul. And now I am quoting from the closing line of the novel, Middlemarch. Her finely touched spirit has still its fine issues. Though they were not widely visible, her full nature, like that river of which Cyrus broke the strength, spent itself in channels which had no great name on the earth. But the effect of her being on those around her was incalculably diffusive, for the growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts. And the things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, if half owing to the numbers who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Now, can you imagine that by, reading these kind of quotes, one can really guess categorically whether it is written by a man or a woman? Can a novel about a provincial life and about its character who has their own pains and sorrows and joys and suffering, without any overt political ideology or without any overt commentary on the social and cultural milieu of its time, can it reveal that it is written by a man or a woman? But that exactly happened with Charles Dickens. When Charles Dickens received a copy of Eliot's first novel, and that was Scenes of Clerical Life, which was published at Blackwood magazine, then in the book form in 1858. So Eliot made sure that it got into the hands of the best mind of its times. And the most influential people, for example, Dickens, Thackeray, Faraday, Ruskin, Tennyson, and Carlyle. It was met with overwhelming acclaim. And no wonder Dickens was so sure that it must have been a woman that Dickens wrote a letter to the anonymous writer of the book, and I'm reading the letter verbatim to you. So Dickens write, and Dickens addresses, George Eliot as sir, because it was very uncommon these days. It was very uncommon in those times for a woman to be a novelist and to have written a novel of such a grandeur and stature. So Dickens writes to George Eliot on the 18th of January 1858, "My dear sir, I have been so strongly affected by the two first tales in your book you have had the kindness to send me through Messrs. Blackwood, that I hope you will excuse my writing to you to express my admiration of their extraordinary merit. The exquisite truth and the delicacy, both of the humour and the pathos of those stories, I have never seen the likes of. And they have impressed me in a manner that I should find it very difficult to describe to you if I had the impertinence to try. In addressing these few words of thankfulness to the creator of the sad fortune of Mr. Amos Barton and the sad love story of Mr. Gilfield, I am bound to adopt the name that it pleases that excellent writer to assume. I can suggest no better one. But should I have been strongly disposed, if I had been left to my own devices, to address the said writer as a woman, I have observed what seemed to me to be such womanly touches in those moving fictions that the assurance on the title page is insufficient to satisfy me. Even now, if they originated with no woman, I believe that no man ever before had the art of making himself mentally so like a woman since the world began. You will not suppose that I have any vulgar wish to fathom your secret. I mention the point as one of great interest to me, not of mere curiosity. If it should ever suit your convenience and inclination to shew me that the face of a man or woman who has written so charmingly, it will be very memorable occasion to me. If otherwise, I shall always hold that impalpable personage in loving attachment and respect, and shall yield myself up to all future utterances from the same sources, with same confidence in their making me wiser and better. Your obliged and faithful servant and admirer, Charles Dickens." I repeat this line once again, that I have observed what seemed to me to be such womanly touches in these moving fiction that the assurance on the title page is insufficient to satisfy me even now. So what strikes me as curious is that the kind of social milieu I am born and brought up in, particularly we North Indians and we Indians are born and brought up in, why we have not discussed or why we have not stumbled upon the name of George Eliot and the works of George Eliot as much as we have stumbled upon the works of Dickens or Faraday or Thackeray or Hardy. I find it a little, bemusing and little sorrowfully astonishing that why couldn't we? Is there a trace of is it a symptom, or is it something to do with the finer traces of patriarchy that still runs deep down in our society, or is it something to to do some kind of inexplicable social and cultural forces of our time? But whatever that could be, I believe George Eliot's Middlemarch is not only a seminal novel of its time, but also a seminal novel of its age, of the 19th century Victorian English novel. And no wonder. And no wonder Virginia Woolf regarded it as one of the greatest novels of 19th century ever written. And to avoid the Victorian era biases against women writer, Mary Ann Ivan began writing under the male pseudonym George Eliot, which went on to become one of the most revered names in literary history. George Eliot Middlemarch, according to its subtitle, just to give you a brief hint of what the storyline is about. As you know, the purpose of this episode, these episodes are never to talk about the storyline, but just in brief, to the study of the provincial life. At its center are the beautiful and inquisitive Dorothea Brooke and the ambitious young Dr. Lydgate, who both have to abandon their idealist views when faced with the reality of daily life. Middlemarch is not only the author's most impressive work, I would say, but it is also a very seminal contribution to the 19th century English novel. Also, two major choices govern the narrative of Middlemarch. One is marriage and the other is vocation. And Eliot takes both the choices very seriously. And the themes are the imperfection of marriage, the harshness of social expectations, and self-determination versus chance. Now, I will definitely say that Eliot beats Dickens in terms of her subject and to an extent in terms of his style as well. Now, to say that Eliot beats Dickens in terms of his subject and in terms of his style is to place too high a value on Eliot, George Eliot. But having said so, I can vouch for the fact that the value being placed on Eliot over Dickens is safely guaranteed and safely secure. So Eliot surpassed Dickens in her nuanced observation of how individual human psyche interact in highly constraining social conditions. Eliot's characters are in general much more fully fleshed out human beings with real psychological depth, as opposed to Dickens' somewhat cartoonish cast of overwhelmingly one-sided personalities. These characters encounter real everyday adult problems that aren't really solved by authoritarian ex machina interventions, and their struggles and suffering elicit and demand not only sentimental sympathy but also empathy and a genuinely sophisticated understanding of human condition. No wonder we consider Charles Dickens a master of English language, an instinctive genius in terms of reshaping and remolding any linguistic aspect. A rare talent, comparable to Shakespeare and Joyce. He is a master of his own style. He is a master storyteller. Okay, nobody can doubt that. But the kind of linguistic and stylistic creativity that is found in Eliot is, and the kind of nuanced realism that Eliot fiction achieved was never achieved by Charles Dickens. Also, it's a thing well known that Dickens wrote for commercial success, where Eliot, I can say, was an intellectual, was a philosopher amongst the novelists. And the stature is even more overwhelming when it is a woman. And that too, a woman that happens to be during the strong patriarchal times of Victorian morality. And that is why, some of the critics till date couldn't digest or find it unpalatable about George Eliot is that George Eliot novel Middlemarch is filled with allusions and intellectual references and hints here and there from, literary and scientific world. Is one of the common criticism against George Eliot, which I don't, find any good ground to hold on to. And Charles Dickens, I agree, that has been one of the most popular writer and will remain so, but George Eliot achieved higher valuation amongst literary circle. Dickens wrote mainly for commercial success, whereas Eliot wrote for her own personal intellectual quest. And therefore, no doubt, George Eliot was the most intellectual among Victorian writers. Therefore, Eliot's mature works have more depth than those of Dickens. Dickens' books are for everyone, or at least everyone in the middle class. Eliot's books are for those who wish to get some reflected insights into Victorian society, as well as human psychology in general. And I believe you won't find it anyway a lesser investment of time than if you invest the same time in reading Dickens, then you are investing the time in reading George Eliot. George Eliot is an immense value addition when it comes to, the style, the narrative, delving down into the psychological nuances of its character, so much so that, it makes you feel about the day-to-day joys and sufferings of everyday life. It makes you feel about, how the characters have suffered, how the characters have abandoned their idealist view when faced with the absurdity of life. And that is why, though it was written in the style of Victorian realistic novels, it still retained the characteristic of a modern, if not modernist, novels. So I strongly recommend all of you to read Middlemarch. If you really want to read something that is of supreme quality and style, trust me, and and elegance that remains unsurpassable in terms of linguistic and ideational quality. Thank you so much. If you still have not subscribed the channel, please like, share, and subscribe my channel, Arguably the Reading Quest. Thank you.